Greetings, everyone. Joseph Kursky here with you, geographer, educator, GIS professional, and I'm so honored to be with you all in this Northwest GIS User Group meeting. Thank you for inviting me. Much appreciated. I would like to speak with you today about 5 forces, 5 trends, and 5 skills in GIS as we navigate our way through the 2020s and prepare for 2030. Why they matter, and what you can do about them, and how you can better serve your customers, patrons, constituents, etc., and also how you can chart your own career growth through this decade. Now, I have great respect for all of you. I was last in Boise in October 2019. I made a visit to Boise State University, go Broncos, and loved my time there. I was hoping to be with you face to face, but this is the next best thing. But hopefully at some point in the near future, I'll get up to the Pacific Northwest again. As a geographer, what's not to love about the Pacific Northwest? Those landscapes you've got there, here's a little story map with me on top of the Bruneau Dunes, one of my favorite places in all of North America. That is awesome. Look at that, the Bruneau Dunes. If you haven't been there, I highly recommend it. It's very windy up there, but a wonderful place. Also, this is a bit geeky, but this is one of the places I've been to in Oregon, 45 North, 123 West. Be careful if you go there. It's on a freeway on-ramp in Salem. Why would you go there? Well, if you're a geographer, you like these sort of out-of-the-way places. And Dutch Brothers. Here's my trip to Dutch Brothers. They expanded into Colorado recently, and here I am at the first Dutch Brothers in Colorado. And that started in the Pacific Northwest, as you folks well know as well. Here's me with my map bow tie. Now today I've got a map geography tie, a regular tie on. Also, the center of the universe is in Wallace, Idaho. So that's another reason why I love the Pacific Northwest. And Private Idaho is one of my favorite B-52 songs. It's one of my favorite songs of all time. You're living in your own private Idaho. Don't worry, I'm not going to sing the whole thing. In short, I love your part of the world, and I love the energy and the innovation of the GIS community there. So thanks again for inviting me. Let's get into the 5 forces, 5 trends, and 5 skills. I think that will be a good anchor point as we go through the next few days of discussions and workshops and networking. Let me ask you a couple of pointed questions. What do you want to see in society? What do you want our planet to be like? They may seem like deep questions for the very first thing, but I submit to you all that the reason why probably all of us got into GIS, if you dig deep down, is because we want to make a positive difference on our planet. Isn't that true? Also, I want us to think about how we can chart our own career pathway forward so that you can achieve your own goals, personally and professionally, and then you can also simultaneously advance societal and planetary goals. Now, a couple of tenets to lay out for you today. First of all, I believe that education, our own career pathway, and educational institutions, online and face-to-face, will continue as a powerful means to achieving a vibrant society. Education is not going away. If it did, we'd be in big trouble. Geotechnologies, number 2, will continue evolving as a relevant set of tools, data, and methodologies. Some of you might remember 20 years ago, there were articles coming out saying GIS is going to be so ingrained in organizations that it's no longer going to be considered a separate thing. GIS won't be a thing in 2020. Well, yes and no. True, GIS has become more embedded in organizational workflows, and people have been empowered in all walks of disciplines, in all walks of life, to be using some aspect of geotechnologies now as opposed to 20 years ago. And also GIS has become more connected to mainstream IT, Python, JavaScript programming, systems architecture, the Internet of Things, and AI and other things that we'll talk about today. But on the other hand, spatial is still special, if you know what I mean. So GIS and the whys of where and the questions that we grapple that have to do with scale and patterns, relationships and trends and spatiotemporal analyses are still unique enough that GIS is still its own user community. Sure, it's more diverse than ever in terms of disciplines, and it's more pervasive than ever in terms of the general public actually using some of these tools, but GIS is still, it's connected to mainstream IT and to workflows in workplaces, but it's also rather special. So it's got a dual role, and we'll try to tease that out a little bit today. I don't intend this to be, okay, here are Joseph Kursky's statements, and now go forth, live long and prosper, and have a great GIS career up in the Pacific Northwest. I would love to have a dialogue with you. I'm all over different platforms, so feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. There's Twitter feeds of mine that they're pretty geeky. They're all about geography and GIS. Feel free to connect with me in various ways. I also have 5,000 videos on my Our Earth YouTube channel, so I'm rather passionate about this, as I know all of you are. You can have a regular CV or curriculum vitae or resume, as I do, as probably many or most of you do, but you can also have, I would encourage you to develop a CV or resume as a story map. So you can put all kinds of course, multimedia about yourself and the things that you're passionate about, as I do here in this story map, but also make sure you include a map. Right, a map, not necessarily a geeky map that you can lay on like this one here. Here's me in Colorado. A map that shows, hey, I worked over here, and then I conducted this workshop over here. I had an internship here, and then I went to university here, and so on and so forth. So make sure you include a map in your story map. But it's a nice way for you to do two things. A, keep in touch with the story map tools. B, show your prospective future employer that you know something about web mapping tools. And even if you're not seeking a different position in your own career pathway, it's a fun way to express yourself and communicate. So I encourage you to do that. Now, a little bit about me, not to drone on and on, get it drone, UAV, little geo pun there, but most of my career has actually been in federal agencies. And I've been really blessed to be in 4 different major sectors of society in my career. Federal agencies, so you see the 3 that I've been in. I was at the USGS from the Cretaceous to the Holocene, another geo pun for you. I'm at ESRI now, so I've got the private industry connection. I'm education manager on the education industry team, supporting all aspects of education from primary to university level, lifelong learning, libraries, museums, scientific organizations. And it is supporting faculty, students, deans, provosts, teachers, students, etc. So that is my role at ESRI. I also teach in several different universities, including the University of Denver. So I've got that academia focus that I know many of you in the Northwest GIS community have as well. And in nonprofits, I was president, for example, of the National Council for Geographic Education. So nonprofit, government, private industry, and academia. Very privileged to be here with you all, and I have great respect for the work that you're doing. Now, we're all about space here, space and place. I showed you a couple of photos of me on off-ramps and at Dutch Bros and on the Bruneau Dunes, but think about, what would be the photograph that you would share with someone that indicates this is the quintessential photograph of my community or my region, something I'm really passionate about, right? Space. We have a deep connection to space, right? That ties us all together, no matter if we're in transportation planning or natural resources or Python programming, whatever we're in the aspect of GIS, we're all united by a really deep love for places and also for spaces. And this is what I've chosen to share with you all as the photograph that tells you about where I am from and where I live. This is the Colorado Front Range. I know many of you have been down here to Colorado, hanging out pretty much at like 39.5 degrees north and about 105.1 degrees west. So southeast of most of you, but I've chosen this for a couple reasons. A, you've got the meteorological component there where you've got the bank cloud that's in the lee side of the Rocky Mountains. And in the winter when we get that, it is a sign of fair weather. That bank cloud sits up there for several days and we have these beautiful days, even in the winter where you're basically just wearing a light jacket. And so the second reason why I've picked this is because it's at the border of 2 different ecoregions, the Great Plains and the Rocky Mountains, the Central Rocky Mountains, the Front Range. And the third reason is because just like the Pacific Northwest, people like to go out and recreate. That's one of the reasons why people move to Idaho, Oregon, Colorado. They love to get out in the great outdoors. And here I'm on my bicycle, but I'm taking a picture, obviously, of people on their horses. Embrace the geeky things that you did or continue to do that maybe none of your friends or colleagues actually like to do. Now, for me, stemming back to when I was a teenager, I would actually go into buildings and get a certain angle of photographs. This is my hometown, Mesa County, Grand Junction, Colorado, on the western slope of Colorado. And you can see that almost all my photographs as a young person are of buildings and infrastructure in natural places like mesas and canyons and buttes, which are quite numerous out there. And so, but I would really like to get that proper angle. So there's very few, standard family photographs in my collection. It's all this kind of stuff that no other kid actually cared about. Here I am on the third floor of a hospital. So, I really tried to get into different places. And the other thing I'd like to do, besides getting out there on the landscape and taking photos, is actually making maps. I've made maps on big poster board with colored pencil, with railroads and piers and urban renewal districts and freeways and all kinds of stuff. Now, take a look at these numbers in the margin of one of my maps, one of my street maps. I named all the streets, as you can see, but what are those numbers up there? They're address ranges. What kid cares about address ranges? Embrace the unique things that you like to do and possibly turn those into an aspect of your career. Now, folks, what really drives us forward as GIS professionals and related fields is that we believe that geotechnologies are absolutely essential. Yes, you can get a good career in GIS, and many of you have. I salute you. Yes, it is a meaningful career. You're not just watching the clock wishing for quitting time. Sure, we all have our days, but we're really passionate about this. It's really driving us forward, right? Because we believe that geotechnologies are absolutely essential for the future of planet Earth. Right? When you think about the issues that we're confronted with, human health, 2020, that's high on everybody's minds, biodiversity loss, energy, water quality and quantity, wildfires and other natural hazards, migration, economic inequality, social injustice, etc. I mean, these are issues of the 21st century. And to grapple with, to solve these issues is going to take the whys of where. It's going to take people applying data in meaningful ways, using a holistic framework, a geographic framework, I submit, but also with specific expertise in city planning, soil, etc. But geotechnologies are absolutely essential to solving the issues of our 21st century world. And I think that's what really binds us together as a community. At no time in history, I would argue, have maps, dashboards, and infographics have been so depended upon by so many, correct? I mean, how many of you have looked at the JHU dashboard? Millions of people have been looking at this per hour since February. And so multiple billions with a B have accessed this, making it the most popular web mapping application in all of human history. The point I want to raise is that this has raised the awareness of the general public. If people didn't know what an infographic and a dashboard and a interactive web map was in February, they sure do now, correct? They sure do now. And they realize that these are actually valuable. The reason why people are creating this is not just for pretty pictures, right? It is actually to convey information so that I can make a wiser decision today about my own behavior. Communities can make wiser decisions about access and whether to reopen public libraries and schools and things like that, and when and how. So these are actually being used. I have a similar map that I wanted to share with you. And that uses the same tools that the JHU coronavirus dashboard used, and that is my own walkability map. So a story map here is a way for me to communicate what I believe in and what others believe in about the value of walkability. Inside this story map, I have a survey 123 in this case, and I ask some simple questions about, is this walkable or not? This particular location, is it pedestrian friendly or unfriendly? Rate it, then germane to what you and I are talking about today, where is it located, and then submit a photograph of the site. Inside that story map, then I have the actual live interactive web map with all the results of my survey. Let me drill down to one of these. My own submitted point to my own survey. This is a public survey. It's crowdsourced, which is another thing that we'll talk about. It's in Australia. It's right across from the Sydney Opera House. Good on you, mate. She'll be right. The point is, though, that I've got the data inside the story map as an interactive map, and I also have this dashboard. So this dashboard is the same tools, right, that the Johns Hopkins University dashboard is. It's using the same technology. You have access, I have access, others have access to these same powerful tools that are pretty simple to use. Now, my dashboard, story map, and survey and web map, all told, probably took me about 4 hours to create. So we're not talking days, weeks to create these things.
In my case, my dashboard is pretty simple. I've got a graph that says if it's pedestrian friendly or unfriendly. About a third of them are unfriendly at this point. 409, as you can see from the gauge, points have been submitted to my survey at this point in time, and here are the attributes of that particular spot. Here's a little legend from my map, a photograph, and that's it. Okay, so the point is,
these tools that you and I are passionate about are becoming not quite mainstream, but people are being empowered in many, many disciplines to use these tools. And then what implication does that have for us as GIS professionals? More about that in a moment. Reopenings of various public spaces, including universities, they're all spatial, right? So at no time have we ever been given, it's unfortunate that it had to take a crisis, but been given a set of problems that have been so spatial in nature. And hence GIS and the spatial framework that goes along with the GIS tools and the spatial data are incredibly relevant to not only this problem, but other problems. So I just want to get you thinking about the following. Many of you have used GIS for quite a while. Some of you are new to GIS, but I just submit that modern GIS is composed and enriched by these elements. It's software as a service infrastructure. It's got these live feeds from the Internet of Things. It's got some spatial analytics that are really powerful, and all of them have a wizard interface, so it guides you through the process. You've got some field data collection tools. You can customize through APIs and the SDKs and Jupyter notebooks, for example. It's integrated more and more with CAD and BIM, so the interior versus the exterior spaces are becoming talking with each other and being able to be interoperable. And finally, multimedia web mapping applications for communicating the results of your investigation. This particular thing that I'm showing you right now, what is this? It's a story map, right? It is a story map because that is the way I've chosen. Not that I don't use Prezi or PowerPoint and other communication tools, YouTube, etc. I use those tools, absolutely, but I use story maps frequently to communicate. And many other people are as well. There are 1.25 million story maps in existence as of May 2020. Yes, of varying quality to be sure. But the fact that over 1 million of these have been created shows you that maps are not just the communication devices of just a few people anymore. It's a lot of people embracing maps as communication tool. Bringing us to the 5 forces that allow us to kind of look into the future as a pivotal moment now in geospatial, I would just submit these 5 to you right now.
As in any top 5, top 10 list, the 5 coolest places to visit in Oregon before you die, the 5 coolest bands of all time, they're subject to debate, and I welcome your comments about these. But I just would lay out before you that
geo-awareness, which I've already hinted at, is at an all-time high. People are actually aware of climate, traffic, crime, public safety, natural resources, and other issues of our time that you and I have been talking about for many years. The general public is now talking about that. And back in the not too distant past, when I would be on travel and I would hear these conversations in stairwells and on airport shuttles and so on and so forth. So people are aware of these. They don't always connect it to the geography or the geotechnology, but the awareness is at an all-time high, which I think is good for us as GIS professionals in many ways that we'll talk about. Geo-enablement. People are actually enabled, even with their phones, to find the nearest library, to find the nearest Dutch Bros, right? To find their way across campus and so on, to find the nearest wildfire. So it's not just locating some fun thing or a useful thing in the community, but it's actually, being used to make decisions about my daily tasks, including, do I need to evacuate? The enablement of geotechnologies, I think, for the general public and for the non-GIS professional, your typical city planner or your natural resource professional, in the not too distant past, and this touches on the geotechnologies, web-based, SaaS-based geotechnologies being a huge leap forward. It was, hey, take this book and the set of manuals and you go learn GIS, and then we'll see you in a year or two. And oh, by the way, you'll have to set your regular career aside so that you can become a GIS professional. I'm not saying that GIS is easy now, right? There's still an interlocking, interconnected, rapidly evolving set of tools and data and workflows and so on. But it is vastly more accessible now than it was even a few years ago. Wouldn't you agree? So that has implications as well. It is opening lots of doors into other disciplines, economics, civil engineering, health, and other places. I'm in education, so my focus is enabling and empowering and partnering with educational institutions, faculty, deans, students, etc. to advance GIS so that people can graduate and make wiser decisions in society. That's my focus, and I know that many of you teach it adjunct or full-time in many different educational institutions. So that's all noble and good. But I think equally exciting is to get these other disciplines at least some GIS on their tool belt. And I think we're going to get there through the web enablement of GIS and the ease relatively versus in the past of accessing it. So take your business professional, let's say, business analyst web. Hey, within a half an hour, they pretty much understand what business analyst web is, what it can do. It can make choropleth maps. You can map the competitors. You can map consumer behavior. You can make an infographic. You can do drive times. Within about a half hour or an hour, you got a good sense of what it can do and how to use it, as opposed to, again, taking, the past, not too distant past paradigm of GIS, that it was a set of very difficult to use tools without a lot of help documentation. Sure, there were manuals and there were some guidelines, but nothing like we have now. And then fourth, citizen science is transforming our industry as well, right? We've got citizen science going way back to the 1870s or so with Audubon and people, the birding community, which is still vibrant. Some of you may know birders. The feathers of the bird, the call of the bird, the type of species, the season of the year, the time of day, the type of tree it was in, etc. So citizen science has been given sort of a new birth, because now we can map that citizen science data easily. And then, of course, the end goal is not just to make a map, right? The end goal is to understand something better, more richly. And I just raised that point because oftentimes people email me or send me links to their data and say, hey, Joseph, I've got my points or lines or, raster data on a map. Great, I'll say. And the reason why I say and is because the map is not the end goal. The end goal is to understand things better and then to take action. Yeah, getting it onto a map is good. Visualizing it is important, but it's not the end goal. Enough said about that, but I think you know where I'm coming from. If not, send me an email. Anyway, the point is, storytelling is the fifth one that I want to lay out in terms of a force. Storytelling is important. It is important to communicate the results of our research, to get input from others, etc., to collaborate. And storytelling with maps has always been important. Maps have been used to tell stories for thousands of years, whether it was on clay tablets or wood blocks or etched in stone or in the dirt or on silver, like Al-Idrisi's map from the 1100s. Or more recently on copper plates or film, and then most recently in digital form, right? So storytelling has always been an important part of mapping and communicating. But now with things like story maps and web app builder and experience builder and other ways that you can actually communicate, it's a beautiful thing. It really is, and it's transforming how and why we do some of the things that we do. Now, I don't need to tell you this in great detail, because you know that GIS is the platform experience of GIS is what I call modern GIS. And GIS has not only survived major IT trends over the past, 60 years, it has actually thrived despite, or maybe because of, these IT trends, going from the mainframe to cloud all the way through all these transformations. And this platform is impacting entire organizations. Remember, maybe some of you remember, to get the GIS help, you actually had to go to a physical room where the manuals were stored and ask that person. There was only one set of manuals per organization, typically. You'd have to go knock on their door and look it up in that manual, and then go back to your workstation. You say that to students now, and they're like, what? That's crazy. Well, that's really clunky, but that's what we had. Nowadays, with GIS being sort of an empowering set of tools and technologies for many people in an organization. Sure, I would submit to you that a few people need to know a lot about GIS in an organization. They need to know about the geodesy behind the shape of the earth, about map projections, about how to really robustly build a geodatabase, how to serve data up in a fashion that people are going to be able to consume it easily, how to populate metadata, and so on. But a lot of people need to know a little bit about GIS. So take your business professional, like I was talking about before. Yeah, they don't really care about map projections, but when I'm working with the business students and business faculty, I do say, if you're doing a global study, you do need to pay attention to a map projection, and here's why. And you do need to pay attention to how your data is classified and how it's symbolized, because color and classification, as you well know, folks, have a lot to do with how your data is perceived by your end user. So I just, again, I think of some people in an organization need to know a lot about GIS, but everybody, I would just argue, needs to know a little bit about GIS. And it's exciting to me to see organizations rapidly adopting this geo paradigm, this platform that we're in right now. And being able to go out in the field and collect data with, for example, citizen science tools that you can truly crowdsource some of these things. So for example, I've got a project here that I worked on with a number of educators where we basically collected, as you can see here in the legend, lots of different things, physical and natural, in a community. Okay, in about 90 minutes, we had collected about 1,500 points with about 100 educators out in the field. Transforming power of being able to collect data easily with these tools. In this case, it was collector, but as you saw with my walkability map, I make frequent use of Survey 123. There's quick capture. There's a variety of tools at your fingertips. And with GIS originally created to be GIS field tools like iNaturalist and other things, you can actually take iNaturalist data or other data with other kinds of survey instruments and map it because they've got a latitude and longitude. So you can easily map data in other systems, which is another transformational thing. This is going to touch on our trends discussion in a moment, but if you've got a video like this, let's say this is a university campus, a South Dakota State University in this case, but what if every single tree, shrub, curb, piece of pavement was able to be automatically encoded so that we would understand the condition of it, the species, the health, whether we need to go repave that section or whether we need to do something with that tree. Maybe we need to trim a branch that's in the way of something else or something like that. If that's collected in a big data, automated intelligence, machine learning way, that's going to be some transformation right there. For example, in this particular small example of mine, it means that the amount of data is going to be vastly bigger than we ever had even in the 2010s. We thought we had big data then. We're going to have infinitely more big data now. And so the challenge then is how are we going to deal with that? Secondly, it's going to, I believe, transform a lot of those entry-level GIS jobs. You're not going to have a whole lot of jobs in the future where you're going to be adding parcels or adding fire hydrants because it'll be gathered immediately, and then you're going to have to manage it and curate it, sure. But it's actually quite exciting because a lot of those entry-level GIS jobs will be, I think, more interesting than they have been in the past. Again, grappling with the amount of data, but just having tools like Mapillary, for example, here's one of my videos on Mapillary. I'm going to skip ahead and show you. So as you can see here, it allows you to navigate based on the data that you've gathered, like you're creating a street view, a Google Street View or a trail view or something like that. But you, the citizen, are actually doing it. So tools like this that give power to the individual to create meaningful data are rapidly exploding. Here's another one. We've been working with RGIS, so augmented reality GIS. And picture this, you're out there in the field, you are with your phone, with their app, understanding what's underground or something that you've collected as a feature service. Oh, that's a light pole and it's 15 feet high or 7 meters high or whatever it is. And it's got this, this is the last time the light bulb was replaced and so on in the light fixture. Wow, that is transformational as well because again, you've got easy to use tools. In this case, people are using their phones and maybe having to dig and saving taxpayer money and organizations money and so on. Let's get into 5 trends. I've talked about the 5 forces, and you may agree or not agree with those, and that's fine. I'd love to hear your input on this stuff, folks. But let's talk about 5 key trends. I would just say that 3D, we've had 3D visualization for many years. Now we increasingly have 3D analytics. That's pretty exciting to be able to say, okay, we're going to have this building built. What areas are going to be in shadow as a result, for example? This isn't just terrain 3D, right? We can visualize lots of different kinds of data, median age, for example, in 3D. Why would we want to do that? Not just because the tools exist, but so that we can understand things better. If we can visualize it in 3D, sometimes it lends additional insight than just a regular 2D map. More about that in a moment. the blurring of the lines between the CAD BIM community, building information management, computer aided drafting and design, and GIS. The GIS people were always really good about mapping external outside spaces, ecoregions, right? City limits, watershed boundaries, etc. And the CAD BIM people were very good about, and they still are, of interior spaces. So why don't we work together? And so stemming from, the meeting with Jack Dangerman and the Autodesk CEO a number of years ago, about 3 or 4 years ago, saying we need to develop some tools that people can use to map interior and exterior spaces. So we've got tools, for example, like ArcGIS Indoors and ArcGIS Urban and other things that will emerge that will allow us to do that. Why should we care about such things? Well, let's say I was at Boise State last October, as I mentioned. As in many university campuses, what happens if there's a major weather event at 2 p.m. on a Friday? Well, it changes every semester because the students are in different locations every semester in a typical semester. And so, okay, where are the emergency exits? Where are the access points, shelters, etc., right? So you've got to, in order to do that, to plan that effectively, you've got to have those interior spaces mapped and the exterior spaces mapped in a seamless way. Real-time data and analytics, big data and the IoT. I talked about gathering data from wildfire perimeters. You've got stream gauging stations, right? You've got traffic counts. You've got all sorts of data coming in from these sensors in the sensor network, including the human component of that, which is the biggest one, right? It's 7.5 billion potentially strong because there are 7.5 billion humans. Each one collecting some sort of data, or at least many of them collecting some sort of data, sometimes voluntarily, like birding and citizen science efforts, but sometimes inadvertently, right? When you're traveling 10 miles an hour on a road and you've got your mapping application on your phone, that's being fed, right? And therefore that street becomes red in a traffic map because 90% of the people are traveling at 20 miles an hour, and therefore there must be a lot of congestion on that road. So you're inadvertently contributing data to this cloud, and that's increasingly common. But the point is, you've got these data feeds coming in. People increasingly want data in real time or near real time because they want to make decisions right now. But in the past, we didn't have that, right? So we had to do our best planning and mitigation and so on and reaction based on old data. And increasingly, people are saying that's not going to be good enough in our rapidly evolving, rapidly changing world. I mentioned enterprise and web GIS. What I mean here is GIS becoming pervasive throughout an organization and the implications that that has on empowering people to make wiser decisions at multiple levels in multiple departments in a typical city government, a university campus, a county, a state, a regional government, et cetera, a national government and international organization for that matter. Artificial intelligence and machine learning, we're just at the cusp. We're just at the beginning of, but seeing already that it is transforming geospatial technology as well as many other technologies. I think there are lots of ethical considerations here, and I'll talk more about that in a bit, but we're going to need to make some decisions in society about how we want that data to be used. And I believe that, I'm an optimist, and I believe that we're going to make our planet wiser, healthier, happier, more sustainable, more resilient with these tools, okay, with these trends happening. But it's going to be people that have to make smart decisions about how these things are going to be applied. Now, let me just touch on the 3D aspect here just momentarily, if you don't mind. In the past, it's going to show the difference between what we did in the past, for example, with traffic accidents and what we can do nowadays. So traffic accidents, that's a very serious issue of our time, right? You may have had loved ones and friends affected by this. I know I have as well. In the past, what we would do is we would do this kind of thing. We would, no matter how we symbolize this, we might be able to make some decisions. But now what we can do is we can run some spatial statistics on this, and we can create hex bins or hexagons. Let me show you that first. So these sorts of things, and then we can pick out with statistical analyses which areas are consistently high in traffic accidents. So for example, if we slice and dice these little hexagons, we can say, oh, okay, there is statistically significant number of crashes at the 99% confidence level. Okay, so maybe like the typical project, you've got a limited staff, you've got limited time, you've got limited budget. We're going to concentrate on these hexagons where there's the statistically significant, consistent hotspots, this middle zone in the legend. Think about GIS in its early days, if you don't mind for a moment. in my way of thinking, analogous to motion pictures. When motion pictures first came out, they were filming the primary means of communicating at the time, which was stage plays. We're going to communicate a message, a story to a big audience, as big as we can get into an auditorium. We're out on a lawn, and we're going to produce a play. That's going to be the way that we're going to communicate. That's the best way we have to do it. And so in the beginning, motion pictures, they were filming those stage plays. And then someone said, hey, we can go out here. We can go outside. We can go elsewhere. We don't have to confine ourselves to stage plays and basically reproduce in a different medium what was already existing. So think about that. It's a rough analogy. But the beginnings of GIS were all about, let's make maps more efficiently, better, faster than we did before. And that was good for its time. And we still use GIS to create mapping products. Nothing wrong with that. It's a noble effort. GIS has gone far beyond what we could ever do with just digital means of cartography, right? We're visualizing things in new ways. And again, it's not just eye candy here. It is to make smarter decisions about the safety of people in our community. In our remaining 4 hours together, just kidding, we don't have 4 hours together. In the remaining short time that we have together, I'd like to get you to think about a couple of things, and then we'll close with some 5 skills that I believe are important as you and I negotiate the rest of this decade together. First of all, despite the rising geo-awareness that I spoke of earlier, I think we still have a lack of awareness by certain decision makers as to why we need a position like yours in our organization. Why do we need a GIS analyst? Why do we need a GIS manager? Why do we need a wildlife biologist or a city planner or others with GIS skills on their tool belt? I mean, I've got Google Maps on my phone. Isn't that all I need? As a result, I still feel that you really need to have your elevator speech down. I mean, your 30-second speech when you get 30 seconds with your board of directors or with your city manager or whoever. Your 1 minute version, your 2 minute, your 5 minute, your 10 minute, your half-hour version, maybe your 2-hour workshop version. I've got a series of elevator speeches on my own YouTube channel, Our Earth. If it's helpful to you, feel free to watch some of these. They're actually filmed in real elevators. I want you to think about something else. What is this? Some of you know that this is an old Mac computer. It's now a doorstop, but at one time it was a very valuable component in someone's IT infrastructure. The things that you and I hold near and dear in terms of technology, they're too light to be a doorstop. They're probably going to be a paperweight in the not too distant future. I mean, think about that phone that you have right now. It was really great when you got it, but now it's kind of showing its age. It doesn't hold charge, et cetera. It's got inadequacies. Don't get too attached to the tools, okay? The tools are important. You know, your field methods, your hardware out in the field, your GIS software, the tools will evolve. What I want to impart is that my organization, probably your organization as well, you're seeking employees that can think outside the software box, that can not just push buttons, but why are we pushing that button? Should we try a different methodology? Do we need an additional set of tools and buttons to accomplish our greater goals? You know, people that can think about problems that their employer is not even asking them to think about. That's the kind of folks we need in the workplace. So don't get too attached to the technology. Cultivate this tool right here, your brain. That is the most important spatial tool of all because you're the one framing the inquiry. Remember the scientific method, it also translates to the geographic inquiry method. You're asking a geographic question, you're gathering data, you're deciding what data to use, what not to use. You are analyzing and evaluating that data. You are presenting with that data, you're communicating, and then you're acting on the invasive species in your community or the traffic accidents or the water quality or whatever it is you're grappling with. And then you're asking additional questions. So it's a cycle, right? It leads to additional questions. There are many choices in GIS and how you gain additional skills. And that's good. That's good that we have choices. We have videos, we have training, we have books, ebooks, we have blogs, guidelines, all kinds of resources. How do you decide what to focus on? You want to cultivate that content knowledge about water and about soil chemistry, about city planning, whatever it is that you're deeply involved with. You also want to cultivate those skills. not just the GIS skills, not just the buffering and the proximity and the mean center and standard deviational ellipse and all those kinds of things that we can do with GIS, but also the communication skills, the data evaluation skills, those sorts of skills as well. And then another important leg in the stool, in my view, is the geographic perspective. Don't lose that holistic perspective. Now, I know many of you came into GIS not from geography or environmental studies, and that's fine too. You might have come into this from health or engineering or IT or programming, and that's fine. Advantage of using something like geospatial technology is that it cultivates and helps you cultivate that holistic view that really is germane to a subject like geography, where we're asked to look at the whole world and examine and understand the whole world and everything in it. The holistic view should not be forgotten. Yes, it's good to specialize, but keep the holistic view in mind. That's what we need nowadays. We need people to look at multiple scales and think about the hydrography cycle and the carbon cycle and the, all the spheres, the atmosphere, the lithosphere, the hydrosphere, the anthrosphere, the human influenced sphere, and all the rest of it. Okay, so keep scales and systems thinking in mind. The tools are changing and the workforce is changing. Now, at this point, I'm going to share the presentation that I'm giving you right now, which is a story map, as you know, but time does not permit me to go through all of the things that I have in this section. But I would encourage you to look at this. This comes from, among other sources, the World Economic Forum. They have a lot of really interesting vetted publications about roles, jobs, and prospects for the coming years. And so I would just encourage you to think about your own pathway in light of some of these reports from the World Economic Forum. Again, I'm not going to go into those here, but you can see here that there's a lot that I've got in here that I just skim if nothing else, okay? Now, what and how should you learn geotechnology in the 2020s? Be a lifelong learner, not get too stuck in the tools, but to keep thinking broadly, as I mentioned before. But also don't think that you have to create all of the tutorials yourself. There's plenty out there. So sure, to serve your, let's say your staff, you might need to create some things that guide them through a particular workflow. But there's a lot out there, and I get this occasionally from well-meaning folks in the community. Am I being lazy if I use existing resources that are out there? No. I mean, for example, think about the last time you fixed your faucet at home. You used Bob's faucet video and you watched that about 10 times. Well, in my case, 20 times, but I'm not very good at that kind of stuff. But the point is, you watched it. You didn't feel like you had to create it. You're not lazy, and it's no shame to use existing resources. This graph here touches on what I was saying about some people need to know a lot about GIS and a few people need to know a moderate amount, and then everybody at an organization really needs to know a little bit about GIS. Now, let me ask you to think about this. Is GIS too hard? Hard, yes. It's a system. It's difficult at times, no doubt about it. Sure, it's vastly easier to approach than it was 5, 10, 20 years ago. But you can take a look here in my story map, a story map from a high school student's senior engineering capstone. That student used UAVs and GIS to create a campus map. And this is the story map that the student used to present that. This student is, 16 years old. So the point is several. It's accessible. You don't need to create your own resources entirely. And if we start with primary and secondary students, we're going to, in part, achieve our greater goals of having wiser decision makers. So we can't just start with the university community. Many of you are very passionate about education, as I am. And so we have a program, for example, at ESRI, my team works with primary and secondary. We've been doing that since 1992. So it's not like we just woke up yesterday and say, well, you need to work with schools and students. No, we've been doing it for a long time. It's a long-term commitment. It really is. Because spatial thinking it's not a discipline. So how do we get it into science, social studies, technology, and other courses in schools? Not an easy task, but worth doing. And I hope you take a look at this student's capstone. I've got a couple of other examples in there about, this is a middle school student using GIS to examine right whales and why they're dying. And what I like about this is this particular student actually had a solution at the end. It had to do with lobster nets and ways that we can restructure those so that the whales wouldn't get caught in these nets. Fascinating. So it doesn't just talk about the problems and look at it spatially, but presented a solution at the end. Here's an example of one of my favorite teachers at the high school level, letting students fly. So that's part of my Geo Inspirations column. I have for about 5 years written about what I think are, a diverse community of geospatial related practitioners in a wide variety of fields. So if you need some inspiration, take a look at that Geo Inspirations column. Here's my tiny little secret. It's so tiny, I have my caving photo from New Mexico with little tiny text. And that is, GIS is just too valuable to be in one or two departments in a city or in a county or in a university or in a private company or in a nonprofit. It's just too valuable a tool and a way of thinking about the world. So I would just encourage you to, even if it's not part of your job description, be a GIS evangelist. Talk to other people in your organization about, this stuff is valuable. You might consider using it. Folks, in these last few minutes, permit me to talk about what I consider to be the top 5 skills for geotechnology professionals and instructors and students. First of all, be curious. Be tenacious. Ask good questions. Being curious about the world and about solving problems leads to being tenacious. How many of you have said, oh, final.mxd, final2.mxd, really final.mxd? This is the last time I'm naming this file.mxd or APRX or whatever you're working on. The point is you're tenacious and you stay at it until you get that problem solved. You get that map correct and that data set just the way you need it. Also, be able to work with data and be critical of it. Now, I mentioned earlier that I was going to touch on this, and here it is. I have a data blog called Spatial Reserves. Take a look at it if you're in front of a computer right now, which I realize all of you are. But Spatial Reserves, I know it sounds
super boring, doesn't it? Go Joseph's data blog.
The point is, it's all about the relevant issues that come up on listservs and in various discussion boards on LinkedIn and elsewhere. First of all, where do I find data? How do I know if it's any good? And then what about societal issues like location privacy, fee versus free, etc.? That's exactly what my colleague and I wrote about in this GIS Guide to Public Domain Data book. And every week we have an essay about a data set or a societal issue or something else. So for example, I've got an essay about imagery. Be critical of imagery as well. Understand data's limitations and benefits. That's the whole focus of this blog. Freeway southwest of Dallas, Texas, it would never look like that if you were peering over the satellite or peering over the aircraft. All of the moving vehicles were removed. All the stationary vehicles are there. So the algorithm that someone ran this image through removed the moving vehicles. Why? Well, not necessarily for nefarious reasons. It was probably because the DOT needed pavement information, like what's the condition of the pavement there? Do we need to resurface? Is this a good place for an HOV lane? What about a light rail line, etc.? So there are reasons why images are manipulated, right? Maps are artificial representations of reality. They are artificial representations of reality. So understand data and know how to work with it, especially nowadays when you can, as you know, in ArcGIS Online, for example, start ArcGIS Online, pull together 6 layers of a pertinent issue and topic of your area within a minute. Do you know where all that data came from? Can you trust it? What scale was it created at? Speaking of scale, oftentimes I'm behind people and the way they zoom in, it makes me feel like they think that the data gets more accurate as you zoom in. You know as well as I do that that's not the case, but there's a danger in these wonderful tools. It's wonderful to have them, and I don't advocate going back to the old clunky days by any means. It's a wonderful time to be in geospatial technology, but just be critical of the data. Know where it came from and make a wise decision about whether you can use it or not. Related to that is the ethical implications of what you are doing. Be critical of data, even that you generate. Maps are easy to create. Maps tend to be believed. Maps are often used to generate views on web pages, like just click. The point is they need to be viewed with caution as other data, as other digital data needs to be. Number 3, know your geographic and geotechnical foundations. Skills, spatial stats, coding, web mapping, projections, analysis, classification, etc. Those all are actually still important. And content knowledge as well. Remember my three stool legs of geoliteracy? And the geographic perspective, scale, systems thinking, and so on. Adaptability, be flexible, be willing to go international, or at the very least outside of your disciplinary comfort zone. So let's say in a conference like the Northwest GIS conference, go to a track that is outside your sort of wheelhouse. I always encourage myself to do the same thing as I'm encouraging you to do. So at many face-to-face conferences in the not too distant past, I would go, for example, at one of the AAG conferences, geography conferences, I would go to this, I went to the social work track. I don't know that much about social work. It was interesting to see how they approached problems and their methodologies. The point is, challenge yourself to talk to people outside of your own discipline. You'll benefit from it, and so will they. Have good communication skills. Develop those good communication skills. Do you have the elevator speech? Do you have a set of resources that you can rely on to say, hey, this is why this issue matters. This is why the skills that we are seeking in an additional employee in my organization matter. Now, folks, I really believe that this decade will be exciting for geotechnologies, and you folks have a key role in achieving that goal. Many of you have seen the John Snow cholera map from 1854. I mean, it's in just about every geography textbook known to humankind. We also have a GIS-based lesson on that that I frequently teach with. The point is, when you think about when people realized back in mid-19th century England that, ooh, we are polluting our own water supply. We need a sanitation system? There's 2 million people here in London at the time. That's a big job. Think about climate, energy, water, human health, and other issues of our own 21st century world. We have to not be discouraged. We have good data. We've got good people like you all. We've got good tools. We've got good perspectives. We can solve these problems. Now, admittedly, one of the goals is safe and clean drinking water for the planet. We haven't gotten there yet, and I don't want to imply that we've completely solved the water problem. But for millions, billions really, of people, we have. And even though it might have seemed daunting, so, oh, we've got to do that for London, we've got to do that for all these other major cities and also small towns around the whole world, how are we going to do that? People dedicated themselves to solving those problems. And now we've got people dedicated to solving our world's problems. Don't give up. Stay the course, folks. Keep innovating, keep learning. We will solve these problems. We will get there. We're going to build a more resilient, healthier, happier future, thanks to you all in the GIS community in large part. Wise decisions will be made with a spatial perspective and the use of geotechnologies for a healthier, happier, and more sustainable future. Thanks.